The monthly jobs report is in. The unemployment rate moves to 7.8%, moves down to 7.8%, as non-farm payrolls increased by 114,000 in September. I want to bring in Phil Izzo right away, the editor of the Wall Street Journal's Real-Time Economics blog. Phil, talk to me about the details behind these headline numbers. What do you think of them?
Hey, Ralph, the main number, the 114,000 jobs, that's okay. It's a little bit less than expected. We saw some declines in the manufacturing sector. Government actually added jobs. But the big news is the drop in the unemployment rate was a real big tumble, went down to 7.8% from 8.1%. And it actually seems like it was for the right reasons. There were more people working. The number of employed was up by around 800,000. The number of unemployed was down by about 400,000. So it was not just people leaving the labor force, which is what we've seen in the past and what we've been concerned about. It was dropping for the right reasons. And those two numbers come from separate surveys, which is one of the reasons why there's a weird disparity there.
Yeah, Phil, just briefly touch on that, because I know last month we also had a drop in the unemployment rate, but people weren't very excited about that because jobs created was also kind of not very different than in September, and yet that was a very negative report. So what's really different about the interplay between the two reports here?
Well, on the one hand, the number of jobs added is looking better over the last 2 months because we saw revisions going upward. So there were actually more jobs added in July and August than we originally thought. Okay. And that 114 for this month is not great, but it's not bad. It's moving up. And then on the other side, there's this separate survey that they ask people the questions instead of businesses, which is where we get the jobs number. The people was where we get the unemployment rate from. And over the last couple of months, we've seen some actually bad-looking news there where people were dropping out of the labor force, even though we were seeing people adding jobs and confidence numbers were up. So there was a bit of a disconnect there. It seems like this drop this month to 7.8% is probably some payback from those numbers that we were seeing early in the summer. It gives us a sense that the market is improving, but you got to remember, even over the last couple of months, it hasn't moved all that much over the course of this year. So even though the drop is probably real, it's still not great.
Okay, I want to bring in Sudeep Reddy, the Journal's economics reporter. Sudeep, give me your sense for what this report means, and also tell me about what you think the impact on the election will be. It's the economy, stupid, of course, right?
Right, Ralph. It's very interesting when you look at both numbers. They both, of course, tell somewhat different stories. The payroll number is, even though the prior months were revised upward, it basically tells us that the labor market hasn't really improved that much over the last 2 years. You've got payroll growth that is basically allowing us to tread water in the labor market. So that's not a great sign. I suppose it could have been worse given all the concerns about the fiscal cliff. The unemployment number is a very interesting one, and it will certainly lead to a lot of head scratching all over the country, because you rarely see a drop over 2 months of half a percentage point in the unemployment rate. It's just it's almost unheard of.
So is that
in
good?
A moment like this?
The unemployment rate coming down as much as it has, we're now below 8%. Is that positive for President Obama?
That is a huge positive for President Obama. This actually brings the unemployment rate back to where it was when the Obama administration started in January 2009. It was also 7.8%. And President Obama, when faced with the somewhat disappointing job growth in the payroll numbers, has actually built a fairly tidy story around his presidency. The fact that his first 4 years were really about repairing the damage from the financial crisis and coming back to the unemployment rate where it was when he started allows him to cement that argument when he's out on the campaign trail with 33 days to go before the election.
Okay, Phil, I want to come back to you. Talk about some of the other things. Average hourly earnings. How did that fare?
We saw a bit of an increase in average hourly earnings, but over the long period, they're still relatively stagnant. And that goes back to the concept, though. This looks pretty good. There's a drop in the unemployment rate. We're still adding jobs. But when you look at the big picture, take a step back, there's still a big struggle going on here. Incomes have been relatively stagnant. We saw a bit of an uptick this month, but that's still, people are dealing with higher prices, higher gas prices. It's not enough to really boost consumption. And when we look at the jobs that we're adding, some questions remain about the quality of jobs. Because while the unemployment rate did tumble, there was this broader rate that looks at people who are part-time for economic reasons. They want full-time work, and they're also marginally attached to the labor force. That number actually didn't drop this month. It was at 14.7% last month, 14.7% again this month. So that gives us, and a big part of that was that there are part-time people out there who want full-time work. So there's this question of the type of jobs that are being created. Are they the type of jobs that's going to really drive growth?
Okay, Phil, thanks for joining us. Sudeep, I want to come back to you last. Just briefly, as Phil just mentioned, the quality of these jobs that are being created is somewhat suspect. And you look at wages, they're not growing a lot, but as Phil mentioned, we're starting to now see, inflation tick up. The Fed's policies are maybe, starting to cause some inflation there, maybe in commodities, gas prices, food, et cetera. Maybe in housing, it's going to perk up again. If wages can't keep up with that, is the Fed policy of now open-ended bond buying, is that going to be counterproductive?
Well, we've seen across other measures of the economy, the U.S. actually doing somewhat better than the rest of the world. We've seen a number of other measures tick up. Consumer confidence is obviously rising, but until you see sustained job growth, none of this is going to be, none of this is really going to matter. And right now, we're seeing two very different tales in these job report. One in the payroll number is stagnation. The other in the household report shows that we might actually be taking off. All those other factors you ticked off might actually be providing us some support. But when you see this much disparity between these two numbers, it means that either one is wrong or they're somehow going to converge in the coming months. And there are a lot of risks right now on the horizon that should give us a fair bit of caution, whether it's Europe or the fiscal cliff. So we can't get too excited about a number like this, especially when you see something that's such an outlier like the household employment report this time.
But just to get to the Fed in particular, positive or negative impact that they're having based on this report and what we're seeing in wages and in unemployment, and also juxtaposed with inflation, commodity prices, et cetera.
Well, of course, the Fed won't be able to take any credit for this report. What they will try to say is that the payroll numbers show that the job market hasn't been improving quickly enough. And so what they're hoping is that the Fed action and the QE3 action in the past month will actually boost the underlying payroll numbers in terms of business job creation. And so we have to see whether that takes hold. But right now, we don't have any evidence in these numbers that the Fed has had any meaningful effect in recent months.
Okay, Sudeep, Reddy, Phil, Izzo, thanks so much for joining us.